In this video guide, I will do my best to show you different options for streaming Super Smash Bros. Melee in 2022. Now, I've looked into various methods for recording games over the years, and some consoles are just plain more work than others. Like, you can record Nintendo 64, but will it look good if you just convert the SD signal to HDMI with a cheap scaler off Amazon? I don't believe it would, but you can just rough it if needed. I spent a lot of time and research looking at the best options for producing more esports style broadcasts, and I believe I've gotten a good understanding. Stuff like Smash Ultimate is simple because you can just use a basic HDMI splitter to your TV or monitor, and then to your capture card of choice. But there are a few more caveats when it comes to recording anything from before 2005, or rather, anything from the SC era. In this video guide, I will do my best to show you different options for streaming Smash Bros. Melee in 2022. An important note is that over time, guides like this will become outdated, and you will need to learn what works best 5 years from now. Most of my research builds on what used to be standard and giving access to tools that are available this decade. Firstly, I'd like you to ask yourselves some questions regarding your broadcast. 1. Who are you servicing with your broadcast? It's important to know for what purpose or audience your show is for. Doing so can dramatically change what your goal is and what compromises you have to make. It's very important to know your constraints and how to benefit from them. Point A. Is it for you? If the show is for you alone, such as your own little Smash practice setup or setup with friends, then you can do as you see fit. If something goes wrong, then there's no real accountability you need to expect. Point B. Is it for a tournament? You may very well likely need to produce something that bends to the will of the tournament venue, or more importantly, the tournament participants. The host or venues may expect a certain type of setup for their players for the event, and you must do your best to match or reach a comparable level with that venue. The participants will expect you playing with the same setup throughout the show, or something that meets the same sort of standard. People will expect compromises, but not something that will have a direct influence on how they play competitively, especially on games that have more at stake. It's best to reach out to the tournament organizers for a detailed explanation of how their setups will be running, even if people are expected to bring their own consoles or TVs. If the tournament is being run from within your group, it should not be your job to be the tournament organizer. You should try to be in charge of the broadcast. However, this will give you much more ease of access if you want to have a say in how the setups will be handled. Point C. Is it for the viewers? This may come as a surprise, but issues can arise if you're trying to appease both the viewers and the players. The viewers are obviously very important to your broadcast, and the show would not exist without them, but the tournament is going to happen, whether you're broadcasting it or not. Therefore, what may look very good to your Twitch or YouTube recording may not be appropriate for what the players are expecting. I'll cover more on that in a bit. I do want to mention that you can absolutely have a vested interest in 2 or 3 of the previous questions. It's just important to know what to anticipate and what your needs are. Question 2. What are the resources you're willing to invest into producing your show? A lot of variables can mess with production and meeting the needs of my first question. Sure, there's a good chance you'll be able to dictate how things will play out, but you won't be able to do that or work within the confines of a partner unless you know where you stand. Point A. How much time do you have to set up? In a production for live sports like baseball or football, it can surprise you how long it takes to prepare for each broadcast, even if that broadcast only lasts 1 to 2 hours. While something like an esports tournament can take all day or maybe all weekend if it's a convention, knowing what time you're going to arrive and how long that tournament begins on that day is important. Sometimes you'll need to spend time in advance preparing your tools or software. Point B. How much time do you have to research or troubleshoot? You're going to have to gauge how much time you can spend learning about the tools needed to produce a proper show. I will go into what I've learned and hopefully you can decide where your goals match up. Stuff will go wrong. I repeat, stuff will go wrong. Part of producing is knowing that things may not match your vision. You will expect things to go one way in your head, and then someone on your team or whomever will have a different idea in their head. Sometimes that's better. Compromises are important, and they can lead to your team and show benefiting overall. Of course, if you're in charge, at some point you need to draw the line and dictate how things have to be. Time is money, as it were. Point C. How much money you got? And here's the big question. How much are you able to spend? You can get anything you want if you're willing to shell out enough. You can get a lot of mileage out of less than $100, but having a real budget will allow for much greater options. Of course, there's diminishing returns at some point, but you will need to decide what other tools you can acquire in the future, like nicer player cameras, for example. In my streaming options later on, I do categorize them by ascending price range. Okay, let's talk about the terminology. If you know all about this stuff, then please feel free to skip to the next parts. I will leave timestamps so you can return if you feel there's something important you've missed. There will always be new technology in the future, and a lack thereof for old hardware, so this video will likely be outdated in a few years, but hopefully the fundamentals still apply. Number 1. Displays. A display is how you're going to be showing the game to the players. You obviously know what a display is, but I want to discuss the importance of the different types. There are extensive lists on which brands and manufacturers make the best displays, but that's something you'll have to research about your particular options. Point A. LCD TVs. LCDs or flat screens are what are the most commonplace today. You have one in your living room and your parents watch crime dramas on it. You probably sit on the couch and play the new Mario Kart on them. And that's perfect. They're made from modern films and TV shows. A lot of console games are made to work properly with them, but they're unfortunately known to potentially have some kind of input lag, which game developers take into account for their games. When looking into a display, try to remember what its purpose will be. A lot of modern TVs may not support older video standards or cable types. These will more likely be better for something like Smash Ultimate, assuming it has good specs. Point B. CRT TVs. CRT, or cathode ray tube TVs, will be your best friend. Like it or not, they're the best option for most people. Unfortunately, they're not the most convenient. They're heavy, large, and make the most irritating whine if your hearing range hasn't gone yet. But I did some comparison tests, and I've got to say, I've drank the CRT water. I completely get it, and I'm going to keep leaning more into it.
I don't need it. I don't need it. I definitely don't need it. I 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 need it!
CRT TVs basically come in 3 flavors. The first kind is the kind that supports your basic composite cable. These are likely what you own already and are solid for these kind of TVs. They have 1 to 2 RCA red and white sockets for stereo or mono audio, and then 1 RCA yellow socket for video. The games and consoles of the era were made with these in mind and work well for it. However, they look very poor in recording, and I don't suggest you use them. The second will support a component input. A component input will use either RGB or YPBPR. I will refer to this as RGB for simplicity. Most of these CRTs support this RGB up to 480i, which will be an important distinction for your Smash teams. There do exist CRTs that can do 480p, but those are few and far between, so I don't expect those to be easy to get. So definitely aim for those CRTs that support 480i. The third will be something like an HD CRT or an ED TV. These can support up to 1080i, but there aren't too many of these available. I read that they include a decent amount of lag and aren't a safe bet most of the time, not to mention how likely they are to be very heavy and bulky. And the last type will be PVMs or BVMs, which are basically the same type but different branding. These will be your goal if you can get one. They have the best response time and color accuracy. However, you'll find they have a range in signal compatibility depending on the era in which they came from. Some do support greater than 480i, like 480p, but you need to do your research on whatever model you can acquire. Some are very large too, so it could be a very fantastic replacement for your old CRT. It's important to know that these PVMs use BNC cable to work, but you can get little RCA to BNC adapters for it off Amazon. Also, you may want to order a few terminator plugs while you're there. If you look at the out ports of the PVM, you'll notice that they may have this little squiggle symbol. This means that your unit has terminators built in and you don't need to order these. They're good for helping with noise and brightness if needed. Unfortunately, these aren't going to be easy to obtain either. Professional/broadcast video monitors were built with the intention they'll be on for very long periods of time. Many PVMs were used for security surveillance or hospital equipment use, while BVMs were used at places like TV stations for monitoring their broadcasts. The problem is we're currently rather far removed from the ST era and many of them have cleared out their storage. In the last 10 years, many retro gamers have caught wind of the professional equipment be good for old games, so many were snatched up. You could always try emailing a local TV station, but it could be too late these days. There's always a chance your local recycling center has some goodies, otherwise you may need to stick to some online sites like Reddit, Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace, or eBay. I was lucky and I was able to get one for my job at my TV station. It only supports up to 480i, but I'm very grateful regardless. Point C. LCD monitors. These are very effective computer screens for handling modern inputs. If you're streaming something like Smash Ultimate, they are a fantastic choice. However, they work well for Melee as well. I will go into the option further along, but you can use adapters for these to convert to an HDI input. Just remember that these can have a range in quality, so you will again need to research the specs of the display. Things like input delay and response time are different things, so many of these displays could introduce more lag than others. I should also mention that most of these do not support audio, so you'll need to figure out a proper way to get the audio to a set of PC speakers. I will explain further in the video, but the methods I explain do offer a way to send a signal over a 3.5mm auxiliary cable. Next is video signals. Knowing what signal your game is outputting, and what aspect ratio for that matter, is important. Point A. Interlaced. Interlaced is the standard signal for a lot of old games, and some consoles like the PS2 only go up to 480i for most games. I'll leave a source in the description for how a CRT works if you're curious, but basically a light is drawing on the screen 60 times a second for 60 FPS. What interlace does is draw every other line and then do the other line, creating this scan line that you see on CRTs. This is generally to improve the available bandwidth. A lot of games can look better because of the scanline effect, but some TVs have more pronounced lines than others. Most CRTVs will not accept anything higher than 480i, but if you can find one, definitely try it out. I do want to discuss the interlacing, and I will be leaving a link to this topic in the description as well. The interlacing is the process of improving the look of an interlaced signal on an LCD. You may actually find that some deinterlacing methods are used inconsistently, and different TVs may have a range in what looks good. Some scalers and TVs use a method called Bob deinterlacing, where the lines of the interlaced signal are doubled to upscale to your TV, which causes a jittering or crawling kind of effect. This is something you should try to avoid as much as possible. Some capture cards, like my AverMedia Live Gamer HD2, really hates being given an interlaced signal and has a horrible static and jitter to the point where I really don't think it's usable. OBS also seems to have some deinterlacing settings, but I haven't tested these much and I don't know how useful they are. Point B. Progressive. Progressive is when both even and odd fields are drawn at the same time. The resulting picture is the best looking is what works best on modern LCDs. More importantly, your stream. With the issue, of course, being that many CRTs you won't find won't support the 480p signal. But there are some compromises we can make that I think work pretty well. You should know most of these, but here's a refresher in case you don't. As always, you should expect to get what you pay for. If you get a cheap cable, you might expect a cheap product. But cheaply made doesn't mean the same as being affordable. You can find plenty of good quality RCA cables at your local thrift store. Just remember, if you buy a monoprice Wii video cable, you may be paying for that one way or another, as cheaper cables can have shielding issues and they can receive interference from other cables nearby, like power cables. However, official Nintendo cables are usually a safe bet and won't cause these issues, nor will they feel like they're going to fall apart. Point A. Composite/S-Video. Composite was the standard format for the NTSC region up until the mid-2000s. What it uses is the normal yellow, red, white RCA cables. Yellow for video and red and white for audio. If you need to make do, these will work and they will work well for your CRT. I don't suggest them for Twitch, as I'm assuming you want to improve your stream for your viewers, but I'm sure you know where you stand. The other option for these is S-Video. This is the other standard for the late 90s and early 2000s. It's a lot like Composite, and if you're bound to a setup that allows for S-Video, then it's a good alternative. You can get S-Video cables for the Wii online. Point B. Component. Component cables will become your best friend. If these were ever a standard, it was definitely a short window during the 2000s. Component uses an RGB signal to display a very clean progressive signal, but it can be used to show a solid interlace signal as well, as many of these cables can support all the way up to 1080i. I've never had much issue with third-party component cables like GameStop's brand, but some purists in the comments is sure to stop me there. But since Nintendo never sold component cables with their consoles, you'll need to look online to find an upgrade. I do want to stress two things. Nintendo did sell component cables for both the GameCube and the Wii, and that same cable for the Wii will work on the Wii U. However, Nintendo discontinued selling the GameCube component cables not long after launch and then went on to remove the digital output in a later revision of the console. Again, purists will tell you that the GameCube games look better on a GameCube than a Wii. I just don't think that's worth the astronomical price tag for a used cable online. There are component cables by the company called Insurrection Industries that use a version of the GC Video mod. I haven't tested these and they also seem to be rather pricey at this time. Please let me know in the comments how you feel about these cables if you tried them. If you want a set of component cables, then I'll also lean to the Hyperon HD Retrovision. The cables are very good and very affordable. I even bought a pair of the male-to-male cables to use with distributing signals. But again, if you're comfortable with the component cables you have, I'm glad. You don't need to get every little thing the retro game preservation scene spits out. Point C. HDMI. HDMI is what I expect you to be most familiar with today. It can support a lot of video ranges from low to high in all one convenient cable. I didn't mention this with the previous sections, but signal degradation can be a real issue if you get reckless. This is an easier issue to run into with HDMI, since we may be using upscalers from old signals to get to our modern HDMI capture cards. Sometimes over long distances too if we're not paying attention, so just be aware of your cable quality and research the distance your cable may be rated for, with higher definition signals losing bandwidth strength as they travel further. Okay, so this is the chapter that could become the obsolete section as different options come up in the future, but it's important nonetheless. I don't think I need to tell you how people record game footage these days. They go online and buy a capture card, and over the years, they've only been getting better and better, with some becoming more focused on higher-end video standards like 4K. I will mention that if you're comfortable with your current capture card, then there's no reason for you to get a new one. But if you're on a budget and you need a new card, then I expect getting a one-card-fits-all games kind of deal would be the best for you. Older capture cards used to support both component and HDMI. However, most of them only take HDMI these days, but that doesn't mean they can't take older video signals. I kept my old Dazzle DVC100 around, and this guy can handle both composite and S-video. I wouldn't recommend it, but it's kind of nostalgic for me to have. I also used to have a Hodge Rocket and AverMedia Live Camera Portable. Both had their own method for component input and their connector ports were very poor. You may have a better card, and I encourage you to keep using that card and not generate unnecessary e-waste. I currently use 2 cards. I have an AverMedia Live Gamer HD2, as well as a Blackmagic DeckLink Quad HDMI recorder. The AverMedia card has served me well over the past 3 years, and it's been a strong investment. It supports up to 1080p 60fps with plenty of support for lower ranges. However, it really does not like interlaced signals. It creates the same bobbed interlacing effect your TV may have. And if you unknowingly set your capture to 1080p, it will try to stretch the video to fill 16:9 even if the preview window is still showing 4:3. Now these are issues that could be remedied in later revisions, and don't forget that other capture cards may not have these same issues, but with the shift of focus to 4K, you may not see any changes in mine for these older, less used video signals. I do want to mention that both these cards are PCI cards, meaning they plug directly into my PC's motherboard. Capture cards these days are still made of USB in mine, and that's fine. USB no longer fits my needs, but I understand that USB cards work very well with laptops for on-the-go recording and streaming, which could very well be useful for when you're going to different locations for tournaments. Lastly, I wanted to tell you can always go to Amazon to get a cheaper capture card if needed. I can't tell you how good they are, but if you're on a tight budget, these could be a viable option if you can do your research and don't want to buy used. The Wii HDMI adapter is something that's been floating around Amazon and cheap product websites for a long time. It can handle 480p fairly well for the price. If it plugs right into the back of your Wii, it can run directly into an HDMI splitter or your display. This device seems pretty standard and affordable for many venues to run tournaments with. If you need audio for LCD monitors, you can run a 3.5mm audio cable from the adapter to your PC speakers. The GCHD is an adapter that plugs into the digital out port on the GameCube, which substitutes the need for an official component cable. There are other solutions that use GC video that are just as good, but for my purposes, this works very well. Unfortunately, this device only works on the DOL001 GameCube, as Nintendo removed the digital out port in later revisions, but if you're willing, there are solutions to hard mod the port back in or add an HDMI port. As for the GCHD, I would like to stress that there are 2 versions of the tool. The Mark II is the release in particular that I like to use. The Mark I only had an HDMI out, but the important thing that separates the GCHD from something like the Carby is that it can do both HDMI and analog out at the same time, meaning you can send an HDMI cable from your GCHD to your capture card, and then plug in component cables to your CRT. Just don't forget to set it to interlaced if needed for your particular CRT. And the magical part is that the GCHD handles the interlace very well. As in the bobbed interlacing problem I stressed earlier doesn't exist if the HDMI signal is coming from the GCHD. Therefore, if you're playing Melee from a GameCube, I definitely recommend getting a GCHD Mark II. HDMI splitters will be something everyone will need. It's something someone can buy off of Amazon. I'll leave a link to a Retro RGB article where they make some recommendations. Splitting your signal to 2 different sources will become very important to your setup. Composite splitters are basic little plugs that can split the RCA signals. You should only need these if you're working with more affordable setups, but you could very well need to use these with other setups to route RCA audio. Component splitters can be a bit more pricey, but not by much. You can find plenty of affordable devices like these online, but make sure it's a powered device to prevent signal degradation. RCA couplers are male-to-male or female-to-female plugs. They're meant to bridge a set of RCA cables, very useful if you only have male cables and need to route audio. An RCA adapter to 3.5mm can be very important to route audio for some setups, for both using an OSSC and for using some PC speakers. The Open Source Scan Converter, or OSSC, is a very useful tool for converting component, SCART, or VGA to HDMI. It also allows you to line double if your capture card supports it. Whenever I mention the OSSC, I'm going to assume you know to use something like an RCA audio adapter and maybe an RCA coupler to feed in the audio. The RetroTink 5X is a new device that can scale and line double signals from composite, S-video, component, and SCART. It's an excellent device for working with older formats, but it does not include VGA. The good thing is that it apparently works very well with interlaced signals. I can't currently test this, but I will share some resources below on the unit. It's a definitely more expensive option compared to the OSSC and will be a useful tool if you have a larger budget. The consoles that can be used to play Melee should be pretty obvious, but I'll lay out your options anyways. Of course, you can always play Melee on a PC with an emulator if you see fit. Point A. GameCube. A GameCube will be a system of choice for purists and many gamers, but the price of the console and lack of digital ports on later revisions make it a harder recommendation. But if you get a GCHD Mark II, it could make for a fantastic option, especially because you don't need to navigate a home menu just to select the game. Just don't forget to hold down B when launching a game to select either interlaced or progressive. Point B. Wii. The Wii will be your best option in most situations. The Wii is very affordable and easily available, and if the disk drive dies, it can still be used as a system due to how simple it is to hack, leading to more Melee hacks and launchers. Its flexibility for video options also makes it a good choice. Just don't get the later revisions of the Wii, like the Wii Family or Wii Mini. Both have completely removed proper GameCube support. Again, don't forget to enable or disable progressive in the Wii menu settings. Point C. Wii U. I might get flack for this, but I see no reason why Wii U couldn't be used for Melee. If you install Nintendo, you can definitely play Melee from an SD card. You will just need to plug in a GameCube controller adapter Nintendo made for Smash 4 and Ultimate. You can always plug in either Wii component cables for CRTs, or look into some lag reduction options for HDMI. But I haven't tested this, and I can't just blindly say that this is an option that you should consider. The next section is going to be on software. Some of these were kind of alien to me getting into Smash streaming, and they're important for you to know. Point A. Dolphin. Dolphin is going to be a solid program for emulating GameCube on your PC. There will be some lag, but you can research options for reducing lag. Point B. Slippy. Slippy is a recent mod for Melee, and Dolphin allows you to play Melee online with others, as well as introduce lag reduction. I haven't tested this option, but it seems like the Melee community loves it. Point C. Melee. Kinda given this will come up, but most people should know that people prefer to play on 1.02, the last revision of Melee. You can look up the numbers written on the inner side of your Melee disc and know which version you have. You can also properly rip your own ISO 1.02 for use on Dolphin or Nintendo. Point D. Homebrew. Homebrew on the Wii or Swiss on the GameCube is a tool to allow you to run community-made programs or tools in your console. It's very important that you set up Homebrew on your Wii. Point E. Nintendo. Nintendo is a program on your Wii that will allow you to run GameCube games from your SD card or flash drive. For travel convenience, I suggest you use an SD card. And Nintendo allows you to emulate memory cards, so you won't need to unlock every character for each Wii you're using. You can just copy-paste over the save file. Point F. Slippy Nintendo. This is another program you should install on your Wii. This will allow you to run a patch on the 1.02 version of Melee to meet some modern tournament standards. Either your disc or ISO copies of Melee will work. The patch includes things like stage freezing, disabling wobbling, screen sizes, and most importantly, lag reduction, something you'll definitely want to have if you're using an LCD display. Last thing I want to mention is streaming additions that you should look into. Scoreboard. Quickly updating your scores and graphics can get very difficult if you don't have a plan. It's very helpful if you manage text and players with tools like Scoreboard Assistant or Smash Ultimate Scoreboard by Detective SSBU. Definitely look into the latter program if you don't know HTML. Input Viewer. I was really looking forward to getting this in the mail. With this input viewer, you can capture the inputs from your GameCube controller. It's super cool since you can see what people are actively using through RetroSpy. However, it doesn't work with other third-party controllers like the Box or other similar fight sticks. Okay, so as for the streaming setups, I'm going to list them in order of approximate pricing, so it may seem more nonsensical as it goes on. So please remember, you can get a lot of value out of a tool if you know its limitations. You don't need to buy every single new shiny toy that comes out of the retro scene. Point A. Affordable. The cheapest is going to be simply having a computer set up with Slippy to an LCD monitor. Maybe run a second HDMI cable to your capture card and streaming PC to save system resources, but this will be more for personal use. Next will be composite or S-Video to older capture cards. All you need to do is take the standard Nintendo composite cables and split them with the RCA splitters. This will work for you if you're limited on options. It can't get it better than basic CRT. A good upgrade to this would be getting any RetroTink model. The last, cheaper option is going to be taking any Wii you can find and buying the Wii to HDMI adapter online. Don't forget to enable progressive and then launch Slippy Nintendo along with the lag reduction patch. An HDMI splitter to both an LCD display and your HDMI capture card will be needed. Mid-range. And this is where I think you should try to aim with for your setup. I found these to be the most reliable options. Assuming you have a CRT that only supports up to 40i, take your GameCube with a copy of Melee set to interlace in a GCHD. Plug in your Wii component cables and into your CRT. Plug in an HDMI cable to the GCHD, then into your capture card. The GCHD does a great job at reducing jitter from the Bob deinterlacing. For the next two setups, I'll assume that you're using a Wii. If you have a CRT that supports 40i, then follow this setup. But also, if you have one that supports 480p or greater, then you can enable progressive. Take your Wii and plug in your Wii component cables and set it to interlaced. Plug your component cables into the powered splitter. Feed one set of cables to your CRT, put another set of cables into your scaler of choice like the OSSC or RetroTink 5X. If you use interlace video, there's a good chance the bobbed interlacing will look bad on certain capture cards coming from something like the OSSC. The RetroTink 5X should mitigate this issue. This will work for both base Melee and Slippy with the lag reduction mod turned off. And lastly, we have a similar setting to earlier, setting the Wii to progressive and plugging in the Wii component cables directly into the OSSC or RetroTink. Split the signal with an HDMI splitter, then feed one end into your capture card and the other into the LCD. Don't forget to turn on the lag reduction mod. Thanks for sitting through all that. This initially started as me just trying to learn the ins and outs of what people in the Melee community do in the current decade while bringing forward the knowledge of the previous guides. Those old guides are definitely still helpful, but the lack of availability of certain hardware makes it more difficult. I have left every resource I use in the description below. Going forward, these will be some of the ways that Now Loading will produce Melee content. But please feel free to share your own recording suggestions and maybe we can make a follow-up video.